everybody, welcome back to Source ADD. I'm Mark Jackson. As you can see, we are deep into the internals of the mystical DRZ400s. It's actually pretty simple. We just pulled the cover off here. We can see the clutch here. It's time to start going through that long list of crap that we identified in episode 1 to get this bike ready for its first BDR. Very exciting moment. And where we're going to start here is by installing a Kickstarter and replacing the clutch, and also just giving a little bit of a once over to anything in this side of the case. That's the end of the disassembly. I will say getting that last bracket off right there is a real scary pain in the ass. Unless you have one of these impact driver style screwdrivers, like I can almost guarantee you there's no way in hell you're getting that off. Like, I was sweating bullets just using this thing, and I know this thing works. The screws got they're a teeny bit deflected, but they're definitely still usable, which is nice. But yeah, let's take a look at the clutch. Okay, so here's one of the thrust washers. Goes in between the clutch. I'm just gonna replace this anyway. Of course, this little lock nut washer here, I'm gonna replace that. Overall, pressure plate and the throwout bearing, push rod bearing look really, really good. There's like no real noticeable wear on it. This inner hub and the judder washers look pretty darn good. There's a little bit of wear on some of them, but it's not like, you can't really feel it. I will say the basket, it doesn't have noticeable wear like on the lines, but if you run your finger against those, you can feel it a little bit. So I don't have budget in this particular build to put a new basket on it. I mean, and it's not super notched, but I think I probably would replace the basket on this in a future build. It's probably because this bike did a lot of street miles and a lot of hard clutching on the street where there's a lot less give than on dirt. But as far as the plates themselves go, there's a little bit of bluing here and there, nothing too crazy. And I'm not going to measure the friction plates because I don't really care because I have a new clutch. But overall, not looking terrible. So the next step is to get everything from the Kickstart kit assembled and put in here to this beautiful little mess of stuff. But yeah, overall, looks pretty darn good in here. No noticeable wear anywhere. So let's keep going and get the Kickstart kit installed. So that's definitely a process. Getting the Kickstart assembly together the right way and making sure that it has preload on it into the stopper, as they call it, so that the idler actually does rotate freely and that everything goes back together is a little bit funky. And the instructions that come with the Kickstart kit are not clear. So you definitely want to find, there's a couple of guys on Thumper Talk that put together pretty good instructional pictures. As you can see here, the friction plates are already lubed up and soaking in the oil, so they're ready to go. But everything's torqued down, and so it's kind of the proverbial moment of truth with the clutch to see how it feels, right? 'Cause it should actually work here, so. Ooh. Oh yeah. Way smoother. Way smoother. Definitely a bit harder. It's definitely a heavy duty clutch. Like the pull is definitely harder, but the action is way smoother. Wow. It's definitely a fair amount harder, actually. I'm not super pumped about that, but at least it's not a single track bike where I'm gonna be shifting all the time. But let's take a look. Oh yeah, there we go. Looking pretty good. Sweet. All right, great success. Look at this thing here. Everything seems like it's working right. You kind of give it a good, whew, it's got some compression. Yeah, sounds right, feels right. All the little nuts and bolts are torqued up. She's got coolant again. She's got some oil again. Just got to get that fuel petcock figured out and get the tank back on here and swap the battery out because the battery is shot again. And then we can give this thing a test start. Kind of bad news on the fuel tank. I've already finished the brake pads. I went to the wheel bearings and all like that. I figured I'd do that while the bike was lighter without the fuel tank on it. But remember how this petcock was leaking? Man, you can definitely see evidence of leaking on the back now. It's just super dirty. Well, they modified the Cherubi's tank to fit the stock petcock because the stock petcock has these two inlets, and they modified the Cherubi's tank with some kind of terrible tool. I'm not sure what they use, but they suck at it. So the Cherubi's petcock only has one. So typically what happens, how these seal, is that there's an O-ring, right, that goes around the base of this petcock, and then it basically, the hole that's in the tank just perfectly fits this little petcock in there, and the O-ring seals it, and you're good to go, and it's nice and clean, and it goes directly into the carb. But for some reason, this previous owner decided that they wanted to use this piece of shit vacuum petcock instead, and instead of using plastic screws that tap into the tank nice, they used the standard machine screws that go into metal. And they literally just tapped this standard machine screw into the plastic. And I can literally pull it out. Like I can literally pull the threads right out. But I'm happy that I investigated this because I bet with like one good hit to this petcock, you know, whether it be with my boot or something else, I would dump all the fuel out of this thing, and that could be in the middle of nowhere, and that could be a real nightmare. So my plan is to, as you can see here, the plastic screws, because they put the machine screws into it, are too small. I can catch a little teeny bit of thread, but not enough. So I was able to find some longer variations of the plastic screws too, because I can actually see that there's luckily more threads in there. But it still doesn't fix the problem that they cut this hole a lot larger. So my plan is to create a gasket out of some gasoline safe gasket material, clean this all up, fill these holes in with some plastic epoxy, repilot them, and then get this thing, use a little bit of gasoline safe gasket sealer as well, and try to get this thing super secure to it and then test it out. I really, really hope I don't have to buy a new tank, because that will definitely kill the whole budget build element of this bike. Yeah, I don't know who this previous owner was, but I'm not feeling too good about what they're doing. Once again, I don't think they got into the engine, but if they did, I would have just thrown this bike away. So let's get this figured out. I'm gonna get it all cleaned up and then get some epoxy in these holes and start going from there. So as you can see there, I put a little bit of a fiber rubber Felpro gasket that I cut in there. And I'm using some slightly longer plastic screws right here. These are 1 inchers, the last ones were 3/4. I'm probably gonna go to the 1 1/4, even though it does put a little teeny bit of pressure on the cylinder inside here. I just wanna be able to get as much compression on this gasket as possible. But you can see the fuel line routing is exponentially better. And I just have to get rid of this vacuum hose and put a cap over it underneath there. But like everything else, once you fix one thing, this is actually a little bit higher than it should be, the Kickstarter hits the tank, which I really don't want. All right, so that gasket and the Permatex gas safe sealant. You can see the blue there is curing, and the fuel line is on. It looks pretty good. We've got a new battery in back here. I've got my little auxiliary power wired right to the back, which I thought would be pretty fun and pretty nice for this scenario. So if you could like rest something on the rack while you were charging it, so it wouldn't just have to go on the ground or under the seat. Also, what would be kind of cool is you could theoretically run your charger right into a little tail bag if you wanted to charge something while riding. So that's cool. The Kickstarter is somewhat there. It could use a little bit more filing, but it is all the way maxed out on its travel. I just want to get it, probably want to get a little bit more clearance between it and the tank. But yeah, it's just got a little trim, little haircut. And it's basically there now, which is cool. It's moment of truth time. You see a bunch of gas coming from this Petcock right here. I screwed things up royally, but hopefully, just gonna put a little in. Hopefully we won't have any gasoline coming out. Oh my God. I mean, it feels solid, like, it does feel really on that tank. That is a really good sign. Well, let me grab the light and see if there's actually gas on the Petcock. And there's not just even a weep or a droplet. Man, look how nice that fuel line routing is. It's so much better. Yeah, we're over the top of the Petcock, which is about here. So if there are any issues in the Petcock too, that would be shown. You know what time it is now? It's time to test start this thing and see if I screwed up the internals of the Kickstarter, because that would also be really bad. It's probably as bad as leaking gas. So let's kickstart it. So she's on, choke's on. Woo, that light is bright. Okay, so new battery works well. That's good. Surprisingly easy to kick too. I know it's got a decompression in there, but it is super easy to kick. Holy shit, is nothing broken? Is that almost all the mechanical fixes besides the handlebars? Look how light bright that is. It's light bright. Wow. Ooh, that's what I want to see. Look at that. That's a good battery. Yeah, so that battery must have just been shot, because it's been like that overnight and it hasn't drained down at all. I guess you can try electrical start too, huh? Actually, it's gonna be kind of difficult. Oh. So much winning. Woo! It's very nice to know we can officially do that on that guy. Well, I guess we'll see tomorrow. Well, time to pull the handlebars into the grips, lube the cables, and then we'll be done for fixing all the mechanical stuff. I'll decide later whether I want to do the clutch switch or the kickstand switch. So for those of you wondering how well that YZ450 fender fits, look at that. It's got perfect clearance right there. And then if you watch it kind of go past here, it gets close, but it's never touching or anywhere close. So I mean, it definitely works, which is crazy. And it definitely looks a lot better than that stock fender. So all you gotta do is just match the rear holes, and then you can see the two front holes, the two old ones right there, and just drill new front holes and get those little metal spacers in there. But it's totally a better looking bike. Oh yeah. So the bars are off, as you can see, and the plan is to use this Tusk universal fat bar conversion. The only thing that I'm noticing is that because of how the key mounts to the top of these clamps, I'm not super pumped about how that's going to translate to these sunk in Allen heads. Other than that, these are going to look pretty. These will look pretty sweet. They'll rise the bars a little bit, but not nearly as much as this. As these super crazy tall ATV style bars that are called the PBL. I'm not sure what the hell that means, But yeah, these are really, really tall compared to the CR250 high bend of the Tusk bar. There we go. You can see the difference. It's a totally different bend. So hopefully we shouldn't run into any issues here. Oh yeah, it's gonna be nice. Okay, so in case you've never seen how the universal bar mounts work, they just sit in the regular 7/8 slot there. And you can see that there's these little screws that are flush mounted and kind of hidden. And now we can place the 1.1/8 bars right on top of there. All right, so got the bars on. They're looking pretty darn good. It's so nice to actually be able to see the gauge cluster here and also not have this stupid pad here in the way for the key switch. It definitely, this stock bracket definitely will not work on top of the handlebars. So I'm probably gonna take this key and relocate it over to the side here. I also was digging through my pile of old parts and I found some ODI clamp-on grips and I had all the cams for it. These ones are just a little bit beat up down here, but I don't care. I'm gonna go ahead and put these on this bike too. The wraparound guards with the bigger Tusk 1.1/8 clamps work pretty good, although this side is pretty darn bent. Luckily, these things actually do flex around pretty well. So I'm just gonna fix the bend on this and get all this together. All right, looking pretty good. You'll also notice that still running the old grip because I had to order the right ODI cam for the ODI grips. But that should be here in a few days. So we're basically there. New fat bars. It looks just like the proportions are so much better than with those ATV bars. So it was interesting too. With the clutch lever, I just took everything apart and lubed it really well and then lubed the cable, and this thing is almost perfect now. It has no crunchiness whatsoever. Glides great, feels great. And it's really nice too how without that crossmember bar, it's way easier to get the switch, which is really cool. So the three final things I gotta do is relocate the key to mount the luggage system. The luggage system we're gonna be using is the Tusk Excursion luggage system, and it kind of comes in about 25 different pieces. But the upside about the Tusk Excursion system is that it's pretty much exactly the same as the Moscow Moto Rackless 40 system with the bigger bag on top that I use on the 500 build. But it costs about half as much. This thing's only like 280 bucks. So if you can figure out how to get it together, then you'll be happy once it's on the bike. So I'm gonna get that on. And then the last and final thing we're gonna do is get a GPS cradle with a wire running back to the battery. I'm not gonna do a switch or anything on it like that for this particular bike. I've got a Kickstarter if I kill the battery. I'm not too worried about it. All right, there it is, all done. It's nice and protected by the fairing here. It's a little funky. Yeah, your thumb's a little close here, getting the key in, but if you just kind of hold it at the end, it's not the end of the world. But it still works really great, and I do really like that it is completely hidden off the bike pretty much, other than, you know, when you look from the side, and now the top looks real nice and clean. That's all cleaned up. Everything's all zip tied. I like these big billet clamps. So let's get this luggage on. All right, we're looking pretty good here. Got the main base on. We got one of the fuel bottles on. Looks like the DRZ has a pretty good fender blocker right there. I might as well put a heat shield on behind this piece of plastic here, just in case as the pressure gets stronger and this thing warms up, it doesn't eventually go into the muffler and touch it. The back straps went right to the rear rack, which is perfect. And I think I can still fit my Tusk tool bag underneath here on the rear rack for the like tire irons and that kind of crap. This is a good test. Good old Schnebly Hill Road on the way to Sedona. It's got some decent rocks. It's definitely making me miss the suspension on my YZ, that's for damn sure. Feels like the suspension is both too hard and too soft at the same time. thinking that at some point, one of the owners of this thing put like super heavy duty springs on here or something. Woo! All right, so we got a roughly 80-mile test ride under the belt for this thing. And you know what? I was actually super pleased. The luggage, I didn't even really notice the luggage. I just put the luggage on and kind of acted, you know, put a bunch of random stuff in there. It's not fully loaded, but it's like, really didn't even notice it. The only thing I'm gonna do is move it back a little bit further onto this rack, which I can probably grab another few inches. Which would be nice because my back would hit this every once in a while, but otherwise great. Fuel mileage was awesome. Got, I think, roughly 48 miles to the gallon. And so with this tank, that puts its range at about like 180 miles, 170 miles, somewhere in there, which is totally fine for the Arizona BDR. I think the farthest we have to go is like 110. So even if we got to, you know, the middle of nowhere and had to turn around, we'd probably still be fine. And plus my buddy's bike has a 6-gallon tank on it. So he's basically our fuel mule. I should probably get him a hat for that, huh? I totally put the headlight completely out of adjustment when I swapped it. It was like literally pointing up at the sky. And we had to use it because my buddy's headlight burnt out on the ride. So we ended up having to turn it around. And we were riding on Schnebly Hill, which is a pretty famous, a really rough fire road by Sedona. You know, it's probably as rough as anything you're gonna find on a BDR. And the bike handled it great. I, you know, was originally pretty upset. I was like, man, this thing has no power, and you know, the suspension's notably old. But the harder I pushed it, the better it got, and you know, I just got more comfortable on the bike. And the only other thing I got to do is swap this grip, mount this GPS. I had to adjust the shifter because it was down so low, like somebody had only been riding it with hiking boots or something. So I literally could not get my moto boots under there without doing the old knee down and lift up. But yeah, she's close. All right, so the cradle has its wire run now and it's all nice and zip tied, at least for this adventure. But I also was running into an issue where that handlebar mount was actually hitting the tank pretty good, and now it is just perfectly clearance with a little bit of gap, which is nice. I can feel it hit the bump, and you can actually see a little bit of light through there. So I just repositioned the tank a little bit by kind of moving that right shroud, and then filed this down right here, and then just refinished it with some Scotch-Brite to make it match the finish again. You can see here that the wire for the GPS is just right there. I gotta figure out how to, I'll probably just tie it into the auxiliary power, which by the way, being back here is awesome. I really like that a lot, because then I can potentially just run something into my bag and leave it in the bag and charge it while it's sitting, all like that. But I'll probably just split this wire, cap off all the unnecessary wires, and then cut these little eyelets off this accessory power, and then kind of just use the same eyelets for both. I also, what you probably just saw was put the heat shield on the back of this to protect where the bags rest on this piece of plastic here. It's actually super easy. There's like a factory rubber bump heat shield right here. You just pull the rubber thing out and then mount this guy, which comes with the Tusk baggage system, right kind of flush to the corner here, just as far back on, there's like basically a hose clamp that goes around the exhaust pipe. So I just bumped it right up against that bracket and right to the front of the pipe, and it is perfect. I gotta say too, the air filter looks pretty freaking good for an 80-mile ride too. I don't see any dust on there. Maybe it's the one upside of having very minimal air filter air intake, is that you just don't get the same amount of dust in there that you would with, say, my 500 over there. So pretty crazy. All right, I think the wiring is done. So basically I just spliced into my little auxiliary trickle charge harness here, so I didn't have to add another eyelet to the battery. And then did that with a little quick disconnect here. So if you ever did need to remove this for some reason, or remove the wiring for this, you could do that. And then you can see, I'm using heat shrink butt connectors because it's just a lot faster than soldering. But you'll notice here that I staggered the joins so that after I hit these with a heat gun, they won't be stacked side by side and make a lump. This way, when I wrap them all up with wire loom tape, they'll sit nice and tight. So but first, let's grab the GPS and give her a test ride and see if it actually powers. So this was hot. This one's gonna be hot all the time, which I'm not a huge fan of. I wish it was on a toggle, but I really don't have time to wire that and mount that. So luckily, these powered cradles do have a little rubber cover that you can just put on over the edge there, so it won't, short out or on anything. But also you'll notice too that I did still use the little fuse from the wiring. So, if it does short out, it'll pop the fuse first, but it won't pop the fuse on the trickle charger because it's after, which is nice. And then on top of that, I put it in a place where I can get to the fuse and the quick disconnect by just pulling the airbox cover. So the airbox cover is going to go right here. So I thought that was a pretty good compromise overall. So let's go ahead and see if this thing will charge. Probably not the brightest idea to test whether it's working or not with a, $400 GPS, but what are you going to do? There we go. She kicked on. Perfect. So we've got power to the GPS. All right, you can see the wire loom tape here covering up everything. And these little connectors are nice and tucked. Everything's zip tied in. You can barely see the power wire now. Everything's all secure and cleaned up, looking good. Yeah, if you watched any of my build on the 500EXE, the KTM 500EXE lightweight adventure bike, you'll know that I love this wire loom tape. It really gives you a lot of confidence about the abrasion resistance of the wires afterwards. And then there's the little fuse box right there. So all you gotta do is pop these zip ties and you can check that fuse by pulling the airbox cover off. So we're looking pretty good. Let's get the grip fixed and bleed the rear brakes, and this thing is ready to roll. Pretty much just testing backpack kit to this luggage system. It's close. I can move the luggage system back another couple inches, which would give me a little more space. I can actually kind of just rest the bag on the luggage, which I'm okay with. Everything else is working great. GPS is charging up. Bike fires up really nicely. So battery's good, and I got a Kickstart if need be. So this thing's ready for a BDR. Yeah, I guess for the next episode, I'll basically be doing some BDR footage and see what it's like out there in the Arizona BDR. And so definitely subscribe if you're interested to see how this thing actually does out in the field, so to speak. And then after that, I'll do kind of like a full review of how this bike is compared to, say like a 500EXE or a KTM 1090, one of those ultra high budget bikes. So thanks for tuning in. I'm Mark Jackson. You enjoy the ride out there. Take care.